Death on the Rock. But was truth a casualty of a press campaign? In a special edition, Hard News examines the extraordinary role of the Sunday Times over the Gibraltar affair.
I had committed a crime, really. I had committed a crime of telling the truth, of saying what I'd seen.
If Sunday Times executives who had something to do with the Gibraltar story, one way or another, are watching this programme, they will shiver with embarrassment.
Now on 4, the message is caveat emptor. When buying antiques, what you need to know are the tricks of the trade.
In today's programme, thinking of trading in the G-plan for Georgian? Well, buyer beware, and Jasper Conran on collecting couture. For the price of these modern dining room tables and chairs, you can buy an original Georgian set. Surprisingly, some 18th and 19th century English furniture is still affordable and could even be a good investment. But how do you recognize a piece worth buying? Less than scrupulous dealers have always taken advantage of some buyers' ignorance. When it comes to antique furniture, it's definitely buyer beware. The rising price of antique furniture has meant that a decent table and chairs represent more than just a congenial setting to entertain friends over dinner. But furniture has to be lived with, and few of us would want to eat at a hideous table just because it was a good investment.
It's 18th century, part 18th century.
So, price tag aside, what makes a piece of furniture desirable?
It's the design, the colour, the condition, the history, the scale, it's the smell. It's why not the smell? Yes, open up the drawer and have a sniff.
Still smells, yeah.
Because furniture is difficult to store in a bank vault or something like that, it's not bought mainly as an investment. I'm sure people have that in mind when they pay a lot of money for a piece of furniture, but it's not their sole concern. They want to use the piece, enjoy the piece.
You want to have a beautiful dining room table and beautiful dining room chairs for your swell friends. You want to sit in a beautiful chair and read your book by the fire. You want to write at a beautiful writing table. You want to keep your gun in a beautiful gun cupboard. Sleep in an exciting looking bed. Put your toothbrush in a beautiful silver mug, whatever it is. And these are all things that make life more delightful.
So the most difficult things to sell are the things that are harder to place in a house. I mean, early furniture, big early Italian furniture, is really very difficult to sell unless it's absolutely wonderful quality, because it's very difficult to use in a house. English furniture of the mid-18th, late 18th and early 19th century is very popular because it's very usable. They're small, pretty pieces.
You could probably buy one of the best Georgian bureaus in 1972, 75 for £200 to £300. And I'm talking about the best ones. 20 years on, I suppose that object will be £8,000 to £10,000. But it's not just the price in monetary terms, it's the pleasure you've had out of owning that object.
Not many people could give house room to the badminton cabinet sold at auction last year for $8.5 million, a world record. It will now travel to the USA, to the chagrin of the V&A, who turned it down for less than half the sale price. But even without a spare million, you can still find something worthwhile at auction.
I just saw two ladies looking at this. I mean, they're going to buy it, or going to try and buy it this evening at the auction. I wonder which part they think is Victorian. What do you think, John?
This foam piece, I guess.
The only Victorian bit about that is the springs and the horsehair.
George III, mahogany, country-made, probably made by a man in Marlborough, so we're told. He came from Littlecote, which is very close to Marlborough, and had been in the house since the 18th century.
This is what I wanted to show you, Jess, look. This has been an original piano. This is where the keys would have gone. But this is brand new.
Yeah, they face that up. What kills you?
You can still smell it. Better the way it is for somebody who can't play the piano, though, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
This is a beautiful chair, which would always have been a precious thing. Walnut, Queen Anne, very Dutch influence with this fine strap work coming down here and these sort of curling plumes or leaves coming up here and a shell motif enriched. The wonderful carving around the seat rail and on the knees.
But if you are bidding at auction, it pays to look hard and long at what you're buying.
John Hayward, one of the greatest experts on English furniture, wrote about 25 years ago that in his opinion there is less than 10% of the furniture in this country, in the world even, which is shown as Georgian, which is genuine. Less than 10%. So 90% of what the dealers and the auctioneers are selling as Georgian furniture, in his opinion, was not totally genuine.
With dishonest dealers can transform the dull into the desirable. Wardrobes become bookcases. Bureaux acquire glass doors. Chests of drawers become rare bachelor chests, and furniture which is too big can simply be shrunk to fit. And it doesn't end there. Dr. Oxley paid £1,000 for what were described as 6 Regency chairs.
I discovered that I hadn't bought what I thought I had bought in one of those monumentally, potentially embarrassing moments in a dinner party where some very shrewd observer said, "I don't think the chair that I'm sitting in is quite the same as all the others." With this rather staggering announcement, we all, of course, stopped eating and had a good look at all the chairs, and this is the chair in question. You could see that there were clear differences between the one chair and the other 5. The other 5 looked much more distressed, the colour was different, the edges were much more rounded. If we have a look at the what turned out to be the modern copy, then you can see, particularly underneath, that the edges are much sharper. There's some rather obvious fresh marks in the wood. And on the front of the legs, you can see here that there is much less, far fewer distress marks, and again the colour is different. The back too, the sharpness of the edges of the wood, and indeed the grooving, there's a marked difference between the modern chair and the older ones. I have to say it's easy to see all this with hindsight. It wasn't so apparent at the time, and one was just not very sure.
Well, after a lot of effort, Dr. Oxley and the Islington Trading Standards Department succeeded in taking the dealer to court. He was fined, and Dr. Oxley received financial compensation. But the problem isn't limited to backstreet dealers.
Well, I think at first glance, there would be no reason to doubt that these weren't a pair of perfectly genuine 18th century dining chairs. 2 of a set with arms, but if we look slightly more closely at them, we'll see that there are elements that don't actually add up. Right. First of all, we always have a look underneath to see what the seat rails look like underneath here, because what we should be looking at are signs of age conducive to the age of the chair. But it's quite clear, certainly looking at that back rail, where somebody's put some dark, heavy stain underneath there, a plasticky style of substance that quite clearly covers up a brand new stained rail. If we look at the other chair, we can see that we've got a brand new rail there, an older looking rail here, an older rail there, and an older rail there, but with new blocks, which is not uncommon in each of the corners. What we've actually got is a pair of chairs that have been created out of one chair. So if we look further into the back, the polished surfaces, one of those backs is going to have to be new. And I think if you look closely, you can see that there's a difference in the depth of shine and the depth of colour between those 2 splats. And I think this is the one that's the old one. It's got a nice piece of timber. It's a good old surface. It's a good dark, rich timber, which I think one would have seen in the 18th century. And it's got a nice feel about it. It's got a richness, a patination, and a depth of shine, which you don't get on the other one. In fact, if you look down into this area, you can see where somebody has artificially induced signs of age. The person that created the 2 chairs out of the one seems to have failed to appreciate that there should be a uniformity of height. But it's clear to see that the difference in the colour of the timber and the style of the timber makes one chair most definitely made up out of new timber. You actually have to be very careful and don't take everything as it appears that stage further.
So before you buy, learn the trade jargon. Euphemisms, more likely. Part Georgian probably means there's almost nothing of the original left. A set of 10 chairs described as 8+2 can mean 8 originals and 2 copies. 19th century Chippendale style chairs means they're Victorian copies, and even when you're lucky enough to find a totally original piece, remember that old furniture is not often in perfect condition. We took this dilapidated Regency chair, riddled with woodworm, to a top restorer in Kent.
Very wormy, which is not uncommon. It's very unusual to buy a piece in an auction, even at the top auctions now, which hasn't at some stage been repaired. If something's been around the world for 200 years, it's not unusual for it to have some sort of damage, and therefore it would have been repaired. So restoration in itself is quite acceptable, I think.
Even if you have very little left of the piece, as long as you can find out how the piece was originally, I don't think the amount of work you do to it matters, as long as the craftsmanship is there. I mean, this lacquer cabinet was brought into us by a dealer to see if we could restore it. It's basically a very good English lacquer cabinet, a beautiful red lacquer. It's got very fine gold details on it. It's not beyond restoration, but it'll have to be a complete restoration, which means we'll have to actually take it back to the wood.
I think if you're going to completely rebuild a piece, then you are probably going outside the realms of conservation and restoration. But what it all comes down to in the end is what the customer wants.
But if restoration can mean rebuilding a piece almost from scratch, why not buy a brand new antique? Reproduction furniture with a classy provenance from a real-life baronet.
I take great pieces of furniture with great provenance from great houses, and I have them amazingly, beautifully sculpted and copied. I take all the details myself with Joanna Hayworth, and we plaster cast each thing in its fullness. People buy my reproduction furniture for many reasons. They see things like it in the magazines. The designers like having wonderful classic things in their house. The original, if they get the original, is a mega responsibility to them. It's an insurance responsibility. You know, if you take a table which is worth 20 or 30,000 pounds, if one of your friends starts making a political point by thumping it, you have to take immediate action. If they spill their cigar ash or their whiskey on it, it's at once subject in America for a cross lawsuit. Last year, I designed the 13 topmost suites in the Plaza Hotel for Mrs. Trump and Mr. Trump. And I'm delighted to say that they looked absolutely smashing and splendid. And they were designed based on rooms in the different houses that I represent, like Penshurst, Wilton, Nebworth, Chatsworth even.
A reproduction is always going to only be a copy, however wonderful it is, and I think a lot of people want the original. They want the age and the pattern that you get with an original piece of furniture rather than a copy.
As far as I'm concerned, I'm producing tape-recorded beauty, and I'm adding to the beauty of the world. And I've had curators attack me on the subject of this. And I often say to them, you know, which of these pieces is old and which is new? And they say, well, I'll look in a drawer and I'll tell you. And I was able to say to these people, cool it. Don't go near that piece of furniture. It was invented by a master craftsman, a master designer, to give the room a lift, to give your soul a lift, to give your heart a lift. And you know, if you can't tell me which is new and which is old from across the room, there's something wrong with your heart or your soul.
This is the wormy old chair we had restored. Work like this costs about 500 quid. That's not cheap, but recently a similar chair went to auction for 2,000. But restoration isn't the heart of it. The real art of the bargain is to get in there first, before fashions change.
In the 20s, there's been some fabulous furniture made. In the 50s, there's been some very good furniture. In the 60s, the Italians have made good furniture. Those things ought to be looked at. They're the real antiques of tomorrow.
Remember these headlines from the beginning of the year? Auction houses were having a tough time with many lots fetching low prices or being bought in unsold. But when For Love or Money investigated the Depression, we found another story. By comparing the catalogue estimates with what people were actually prepared to pay at the auction, we found some encouraging results. So, for the discerning bidder, here's our top 10 buoyant areas of collecting. At number 10, it's jewellery. This pear-shaped diamond made its £6.5 million estimate, proving that when the going gets tough, the tough go shopping. Still for the big spenders, it's manuscripts and books at 9. This ancient English manuscript more than doubled its £1 million estimate. And coming in at 8, it's coins, the art market's answer to gold bullion for the rich but nervous investor. Past the auctioneer's estimate. Coming in at 6, there's a surprising new entry, vintage tools and machinery. This rare 19th century ornamental raise engine managed to treble its £7,000 asking price. Another new mover is tribal art at 5. This Easter Island statue sold for 5 times more than expected, as did another new entry at 4. Copied paintings, fakes and proud of it. Some copies of great masterpieces are now highly collectible in their own right, especially the work of master copyist Miguel Canals. Another adventurous investment could be whiskey, now in at number 3. This vintage bottle of 40-year-old Dallintober Scotch whiskey spread more than a little festive spirit by smashing the £500 estimate 5 times over. You can't do much better than celebrity memorabilia in at 2. At the sale of Ava Gardner's collection of art and antiques, cocktail dresses estimated at £100 went for over £1,000. And what about antique French porcelain in at number? With the right designer label inside. We asked the man who's become a label in his own lifetime, Jasper Conran, to check out the competition.
I love Paris in the springtime. I love Paris in the fall. I love Paris in the winter when it drizzles.
I am a ready-to-wear designer, not a couturier. However, I am passionate about couture, especially the work of Balenciaga and Madame Vionnet. Their classic lines and creativity have been a continual source of inspiration to me. But what makes other people want to collect second-hand couture?
It started really with a few people in the 70s, and I was one of them, being very, very bored with hippie fashion. And there wasn't really anything else. And at that point, you could buy a fantastic black sequin Chanel for £5. And I wore it non-stop for about 3 years, leaving black sequins in every kind of drawing room in London, including in a lot of people's soap dishes. And I got known as the Sequin Queen.
The first piece I got, in fact, was, I think I was about 12, and it was a Balenciaga suit from A Fate at the Sadler's Wells. And it just kind of snowballed from there, really.
I love Paris in the summer when it drizzles. I love Paris.
My particular reason for collecting couture is to preserve it. You know, I want to have a study collection. I want people to be able to come and see things in pristine condition.
Well, I wanted to look like Marilyn Monroe and Lauren Bacall. Those were the people I admired and the style I admired. So I went looking for that kind of clothes.
You do something to me.
It's a 1950s silk chiffon cocktail dress. And I got it for, I think, £15 in an Oxfam shop in Manchester.
Collecting second-hand couture was once the province of fashion historians and eccentric women looking for an unusual dress for a Saturday night out. Now, it's become a shrewd investment, with museums and private collectors prepared to pay up to £50,000 for the top labels at auction.
I got in early enough in certain areas to frankly have made quite a lot of money out of it, and I will admit that some of the early things I have sold on to museums, and it was a sorry day when on the very early ones I didn't make about 1,000%.
But it's not too late to start collecting. Valuable pieces of couture can still be picked up in the most unlikely of places.
The best places to shop are charity shops in affluent suburbs where people take their cast-offs after only having worn them for, well, a couple of times, maybe 2 seasons or something.
I don't go to carefully manicured salons to buy what I find. I mean, I'm going through sort of rubbish tips. And you find a bit of limp chiffon in a sort of particularly interesting shade of knicker pink. And you think, and you pull it out and it's like a crumpled rag. But you recognize the embroidery. And whoopee, it's Schiaparelli and it's probably going to fetch about 2 or 3 grand.
So what is it about couture which makes it so valuable? Unlike ready-to-wear designer clothes, couture is a one-off garment made to fit the individual. Always handmade, couture uses the best fabrics with detailed stitching, beadwork, embroidery, and pleating.
Its value lies in the very fine pleating that Fortuny produced that can't be done today. He used very, very light China silk. It's from the 20s, and it's worth about £4,500.
But it's not just exquisite craftsmanship which makes it valuable. Collectors are also prepared to pay for the designer's artistic vision.
A lot of them employed artists, like Schiaparelli employing Dali. And, you know, dresses were beaded like Mondrian's and like African art. And that was, it became very much a sort of a statement of art, you know, cubist dresses and so on and so forth.
I love her every moment.
So, Hamish, this dress looks remarkably similar to a pair of my mother's curtains.
Well, Jasper, you can mock, but this was Jules-François Carré's finest hour. It's autumn-winter 1961, and it was the star piece of the collection which he was then designing for Nina Ricci. It's photographed by all the major magazines, so I'm really excited to have found it, particularly as it didn't have a label. This is a Hardy Amies from autumn-winter 1950. Kind of double kick pleat at the back.
It is entirely possible that the Queen might have worn something like this. With couture so highly sought after, why do some collectors risk ruining their investment by wearing it?
You know, it's fun, you know, to go to a party and everyone's dripping in frightfully expensive Chanel and you're in a dress that she made in 1927. Sort of rather wipes the floor, doesn't it?
So is contemporary couture worth collecting?
Today's couture is very flashy, but it's very transient. Whereas you take a Balenciaga and you can wear it today and you can wear it until you die. And you look wonderful in it.
So, who are going to be the collectible designers of tomorrow? My money would not go on the haute couturiers. It would go on the ready-to-wear designers, such as Vivienne Westwood, John Galliano, or as a dinalaya. So shop now.
Join me next week on For Love or Money when we'll be metal detecting and digging for gold, and George Melly will be finding out what makes the watch collector really tick. If there's any area of the art market you think needs investigation, why not write to us at For Love or Money, Channel 4 Television, 60 Charlotte Street, London W1P 2AX.
And next week's programme is at the slightly earlier time of 3:55.